So Tony Stark is officially back and alive in the Ultimate Universe. Captain America and Human Torch lead the Ultimates to take on the Red Skull, which tells us more about some secrets that the Maker has hidden. Also, wait until you find out who the Red Skull is in the Ultimate Universe. Welcome back to Keepin the Comic, and we're diving back into the Ultimates by Dennis Camp with issue number 10. Now, initially here, this starts off with the Human Torch recapping how he took out Hitler. And we can see here a series of images of Hitler burning up, right? Now, up until this point here, most believe that Hitler had offed himself, but then Human Torch explains that this was only just a cover-up story, and he mentions here how the Soviets were threatening a superhuman arms race and screaming about illegal deployment overseas, and back then, we had this thing called politics. Now, Janet, she's curious. She's like, well, how did it feel? So Human Torch is like, how did it feel? And he begins to go on about how his brain isn't the world's oldest computer, but it is close. And in the old days, that he had to manually erase memories so it wouldn't slow down and seize up under the weight of all of that history. And how he gave up his Medal of Honor and the memory of getting that Medal of Honor. How he gave up good friends, good years, and most memories of even his brilliant father, Dr. Horton. Now, a lot of you know who Dr. Phineas Horton is here from the 616. He was the scientist that created the original Human Torch android, so that's who he's talking about here. But the one thing that kind of made me chuckle a little bit here, he's like, but that memory I keep in full color. And he's talking about the memory here of him offing Red Skull in high definition and how he goes back to it again and again and again and how it keeps him warm. So Cap's like, all right, man, enough about the good old days of killing Nazis. We got some Nazis that we got to go kill right now. So where they're at currently right now is at this place called Castletown. And it's described here as a militarized civilian stronghold of a sectionist group that's self-designated and call themselves here the Red Skulls. And this is one of 23 such militia towns across the North American Union. So Human Torch here is kind of narrating and giving us a breakdown as to what's going on here. He mentions the Red Skulls, how the neo-Nazi movement inspired by the Nazi super soldier Johann Schmidt, the Red Skull, that appropriated the tactics and iconography here of the 1970s NYC officer turned vigilante Frank Castle. And at this moment, guys, I'm like, Dennis, do not threaten me with a good time. Where is Frank Castle, okay? Bring in the Punisher. Now, the Red Skulls here, they're described as a hate group by Southern Poverty Law Center, and their precise ideology is inconsistent, as he says, and contradictory. That their group is primarily identity-driven. They focus primarily on anti-establishment, but mostly they focus on terrorizing the weak and the vulnerable, and how Castletown is a permanent home to approximately 1,500 men, women, and children, as well as who they call the Grand Skull. And the Grand Skull here is the leader of the National Red Skull movement. So this was Human Torch here, like scanning the internet and finding out all this information. So as the Ultimates here attempt to go on in and essentially climb over the castle walls, there's a voice that comes in and says, what's going on here? So Cap responds back, he's like, Tony, you're supposed to be in surgery. And then we get this picture here of Tony basically being held up and being operated on suspended, right? And Tony's like, listen, I am. And Cap's like, bro, without anesthesia? And of course, Tony's trying to play it off. He's like, dude, I'm fine. The Immortus engine is keeping me stable right now. But Cap is just like, bro, you should be resting. And in reality, Cap just kind of wants him to leave him alone so that he can actually do this mission. But Tony's just like, dude, I gotta stay busy. Like, I need something to focus on here. So he asks Steve, he's like, what's going on? But Cap is just like, dude, I do not have time to get you up to speed. But if you want to follow along here into the feeds, you can take a look to see what's going on. But then this is when Jim Hammond, Human Torch, starts to give like a real-time mission report. And he mentions how they've ruled out a frontal assault for the same reason that Stain and Stark never stormed the castles. It's also the same reason as well why the Maker's Council won't touch them as well. So this kind of gives us an idea here that they're sort of operating on their own regime, right? And their own agenda here, the Red Skull. And the reason why they never stormed it is because they have kids here. Their kids are currently on this premise as well. And the one thing that Jim is concerned about is like, listen, the Ultimates are not baby killers. Whatever they say about us on the news, we can't take that risk. So therefore, he's like, we have to make this a stealth mission. And you can see them start going into stealth mode as some of the Red Skull here is kind of looking around like, yo, what in the world is going on? Because there was some smoke that was used to cloak them. And that's when we see Captain America jump in, and one of them is like, oh crap. And at the same time here, then we have Wasp, we have Hank Pym, who are also doing their thing too, Giant Man and Wasp, right? Now, Human Torch mentions how they are perfect for this sort of operation on paper though, because he mentions that the Pym particles give them both the opportunity, or the ability, I should say here, to shrink and to grow as well. How Wasp is a natural, she's smart but not neurotic, she's confident but not cocky. It's almost like she's been doing this for years. But on another note, her partner, Giant Man, Hank, this dude is a whole nother story. Jim realizes that he's got a big heart, but he's just not fit for this line of work. How Hank is always second guessing himself, hesitating when he shouldn't. And of course, this is a callback here to the Maker, because the Maker did something to damage his brain, and that's the reason why Hank is the way that he is right now in this particular universe. And you can see here, because of that hesitation, you can see that Hank is kind of screwed this up. He's like, yo, is this the right spot? Like, while he's inside of someone's brain, he's like, dang, perspective shift, I'm all disoriented. And then you can see him kind of like bang, 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 like he's almost like he feels claustrophobic trying to get himself out of there. But then he finally exits through his ears and he's like, all right, I'm all right, I'm all right. But the thing about it here is that Jim is making this assessment. He's like, it'll get him killed one day, probably soon, just simply because of this lack of natural ability to be able to do these type of things. He continues on how he mentions how Hawkeye never hesitates as he's like throwing these arrows here at two of the Red Skulls. The problem with, of course, Hawkeye here is that they just need to make sure that he's always pointing in the right direction. And because he threw those fabricated noise canceling knockout arrows, even the men, when they fall, they don't even whisper. Now on comms here, we hear Tony Stark saying the Red Skulls have nothing to do with the Council or the Maker. They're not a priority. But then Cap is like, listen, I've received information that connects this organization to Hand, and Nazis are always a priority. Now, the Hand was mentioned here in the Ultimate Universe one-shot series to catch you up for the year. So we did cover that here, but the Hand, just to kind of give you some perspective, they're basically kind of like a secret organization that was under the Maker's Council here, that was created here by the Maker himself, and it was led by Nick Fury. But we found out that Nick Fury is actually an LMD. We don't even know if the real Nick Fury is actually still alive or not. But they would carry out here secret covert missions, one of which was to kill the Inhumans, which is something that will be mentioned here as we move forward in this particular issue. Now, in response to what Cap had said here about the Nazis always being a priority, we do see Hawkeye saying here, well, it's all one fight, Tony, in reference to what Tony had said a little bit earlier here. But then on the screen, we see Tony looking around, and you can see he's looking at what Spider-Man is doing. He's looking at what's going on here with the Ultimate X-Men on one screen. Then you also see here that he's looking also at what's going on with the Ultimate Black Panther. So it seems as if though here that Tony is beginning to see the whole picture as to what's going on here in this Ultimate Universe, which of course gets me excited because I'm just like, when are they going to all kind of come together as one? But as we go on here, Jim Hammond, Human Torch, is continuing to kind of do his narration here of this entire battle and kind of assessing really what's going on with the rest of the team. He mentions how Sting even doesn't argue. He never argues. Wow, like Tony's like, answer me, Cap. But Human Torch understands Steve. He's like, whenever possible, Captain America lets his actions answer for him. So Cap simply responds back to Tony. Finally, is just like, dude, get some rest. So as they get closer, Human Torch calls out. He's like, Castle Alpha 1 is up ahead. So Cap's like, okay, good. Lay it on him thick, Jim. And then Human Torch gives his sort of narration here on why this is important. He's like, of course, this is a priority, Tony. If you'd seen what we'd seen, you know why it was a priority. But even so, seeing is no longer believing. Reality is so easily doctored now. Nothing is what it seems. Everything can mean anything. The truth must be verified by hand. So here we are fighting Nazis with laser guns. It strikes my upgraded sense of humor as funny, but I don't laugh. And here we begin to see a flashback of the Human Torch, Captain America, Bucky Barnes, and Namor when they were fighting together against Nazis. It's all kind of funny in a way to Human Torch because he's just like, listen, some things never change. Now, when they finally get on the inside, what sort of shocks them here is what they see in front of them, because we see posted up on a wall here Namor with the words "the submariner" under him with fishes all around him. and of course, Red Skulls on the side. And as they continue to look on, there's a voice that comes in that says, well, the gang's all here. It's an invaders reunion. And when we pan to see who said this, we see a guy with the Red Skull mask on. And he's like, but we're well prepared for invaders. So then Human Torch accesses the Altnet again. And this is where we learn that this is the Grand Skull. And he mentions how there's been at least 5 different men who've held the position of Grand Skull before died violently. The civilian identity of the current Grand Skull is unknown to the public and perhaps even the larger organization itself. But Torch is like sort of like in shock here. He's like, yo, it's really him. Like, it's really him. And then Red Skull responds back. He's like, King Namor, the submariner? Yes, it's really him. Though I'm afraid he's lost his infamous vigor. And he continues on to say, he's like, you weren't supposed to find out about him. I wasn't ready to see you yet. And at the same time, the Human Torture, he's trying to piece things together. But voice recognition is coming up as an error. Facial recognition is coming up as an error. When he looks at the biometric scan results, he's like, okay, estimated age 73, estimated height 5'8", identity inconclusive. He can't figure out who this Red Skull is. So Red Skull asks a question to Cap. He's like, so how's Tricks, Cap? So Cap's not in for the games, man. He's like, yo, get him down from there now. And Torch is like, did you kill him? And he responds back, the Red Skull, he's like, of course not. But he does give us some insight here as to what exactly happened. He's like, listen, the certificate of authenticity says his death was a political matter, an underwater coup of some kind. How the Mad King was overthrown according to Atlantean custom and executed according to the Atlantean law, as were his many wives, allies, and his heirs. But the body became a holy site. Religion sprung up around it like seaweed, oppressed the Atlanteans, making pilgrimages and problems. The new regime down there didn't like it, so they exiled their former king after they killed him, which has to be some kind of first. It doesn't decay. See, they say the worshippers, they say it isn't just his super dense tissue. They claim the ocean's microorganisms refuse to eat the body, that even dead, every living thing down there recognizes its rightful king. And then he kind of mocks it. He's like, these things that people hold on to, huh? And how it wasn't my idea to mount him, by the way. That was the last guy, a real collector, very into big game. But it turns out the corpse is a killer recruitment tool. The boys can't get enough of it. They practically piss themselves. And it's here where Torch realizes that the voice that is speaking from Red Skull here, that it's not just distorted, it's enhanced. It's braided with hypnotic suggestions at the frequency of human thought, which is most likely how they probably recruit some of the other people to join the Red Skulls, right? And Torch realizes that it's a manufactured charisma. The Red Skull continues on. He's like, you know, there's a lesson in there somewhere about symbols and their context, and how down there he's a miracle, but up here he's a joke, the fish that never rots. So this all but pisses off Torch. And Cap gets a cue. He's like, all right, I got the signal. Ultimates, this is what we trained for. Clear the room. And as they go through here, moving precisely, calmly, naturally, reinforcing their strengths, compensating for weaknesses, they move like a finely tuned machine and taking out the Red Skulls that are in the room. And you get the shot here of Giant Man going into somebody's mouth or coming out of somebody's mouth. And I'm like, gross. And this all just feels familiar here to the Human Torch. So then Cap shouts after they're taking everybody out. They're like, the room is clear. Somebody get him down from there, talking about Namor. And then Cap mentions, he's like, I'm going to break open your skull to the Grand Skull. The Grand Skull is like, hold on, wait for a second here. Wait a minute. And then he fires off something at Cap. And while he fires it off, he says, he's like, you know, you can learn a lot from us, how we operate. I mean, we both preach a violent revolution against the world government, but we've been at it for longer than you have. And then this is where it gets interesting, because when Torch accesses the Altnet again, the headline states that Red Skull militia massacres caravan of inhuman refugees on the southern border. Now, one of the things that we had learned earlier is that Hand, or at least Nick Fury, was used by the Maker to take out the Inhumans. So it would seem that whatever refugee Inhumans were left after that the Red Skulls, they took them out. Cap's like, listen, you're racist, you're thugs, and you're murderers. We're nothing like you. So Red Skull's like, yeah, you're right about that. We've got more money, we got better branded, and a much larger membership. We give them an enemy, a symbol. We give them something to believe in and something to die for. And then in that moment, we see this big old dude come in here with a bandana on. He got the Red Skull right on his chest. And I'm like, who is this dude? And then that's when Red Skull lets us know. He's like, here's one of our true believers now. His name is John Walker. And I'm like, John Walker, the U.S. agent. And then he explains how John's been one of the devoted leaders here for years, or devoted followers here for years, ever since he was a boy. And he mentions how 16 months ago that there was a box, a metal box that he received, and a message from Tony Stark and a vial of super soldier serum, which makes sense considering that he should be a part of the Thunderbolts, right? But I was just like, whoa, kind of like a shock. They're bringing in a lot of characters here into this particular issue, which is the reason I'm just like, oh, you know. But Red Skull continues on. He's like, listen, you know what I said, which would imply that he told them to take the super soldier serum, maybe, because he proceeds to say, I said, kick their heads in, John. So then John charges after Cap, and then Torch, playing no games, just fries this dude's head off with like no hesitation whatsoever, to the point where Cap is just like, bro, what? So then Red Skull fires off a blast here at Cap. Cap blocks it with his shield, and Cap's just like, yo, dude, you're not the real Red Skull. I killed Yohan Smith over 75 years ago. Take that thing off and give up this charade. And that blast ricochets back here and hits his mask. And then the distorted voice mechanisms that they were using, that goes away for a little bit. And then we hear the voice here of Tony Stark in Red Skull's head. He's like, this is Tony Stark to Grand Skull. I am transmitting directly to your skull. And in the last 20 minutes, I've scrubbed all known Red Skull content from the internet, crashed all rated platforms, and drained all your secret bank accounts. Yes, even that one. Because of course, like Tony said earlier, he needs something to focus on. So then Red Skull's like, my goodness, it looks like you've got me, Captain America. You've done it again. And then he presses this button. But before he goes, he says these last things. He's like, listen, but I am like you now, Cap, more than a man. I am a symbol. And symbols, they don't die. They just come back different, which is another way of saying cut off one head, two shall take his place. And then he says these last words here. He was like, it was good to see you, Steve. And I'm like, that looks a little personal, because you can see Cap's face looking in shock. So I'm like, who is it behind that mask? Now, right after these events here, they go to kind of give a ceremony here to Namor, because he was one of their fallen comrades, was a part of the invaders, and how not much was said, but what was said was true. And mentioned how he fought like hell and he was their brother. As much as any man in Arlington, the ocean was his only country. That's where he belongs. So now we give the sea back her king. May he inspire many, a revolution even in death. And later on, we see Cap looking outside the window here in sort of like disarray. And this is where we get the narration of Jim Hammond kind of giving a real-time report. And he mentions how Steve hasn't slept or spoken since the funeral, how he just sits in this room with the light burning all night. And he mentions, as a result of his cognitive upgrade, I have gotten much better at reading human emotional cues. I now recognize that Steve is deeply troubled, as is Jim himself. And he mentions how it's not just Namor. It was something the Grand Skull said, not the mind control distortion, but what it was hiding. And he plays back how he says, it was good to see you, Steve. And he was like, it's something familiar. And then he goes to try to match the voice. And it's in that moment when it hits him, as he starts searching and he realizes that there is a 90% voice match found. And that's when he realizes that it's James Buchanan Barnes, aka Bucky. So as usual, really good story overall, right? I mean, we kind of saw that reveal coming here, but it was still done right in a good way. I still want to know what's going on with Frank Castle. You can't tease me like that, Dennis, and then not show me anything else about Frank Castle. But what did you think here, guys, about this particular issue? Leave it down below in the comments. Leave a like on this video here for the YouTube algorithm if you can do that for us. Also, subscribe if you're new to the channel. Check out our playlist here for the Ultimates. We've also covered other things like Ultimate Black Panther, Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate Wolverine. Let us know here your thoughts about that, and all those links are going to be down below in the description. Also, if you're looking for a way to support the channel, our Patreon link is also going to be down below in the description as well. That way you can unlock exclusive memberships, be in exclusive rights here within our Discord. We would love to have you. Appreciate you watching, and as always, thank you so much for kicking it with Keepin' It Comic. Bye!